A man claims he's dead, but his heart is still beating. The fluorescent lights of the 87th precinct buzzed quietly overhead as Detective Mark Rivers sorted through the stack of cold cases on his desk. At 3 in the morning, even New York's busiest police station settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the occasional ring of a phone or the shuffle of paper. Rivers had grown accustomed to the night shift over his 15 years on the force, preferring the solitude it offered for deep thinking. But tonight, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an electricity he couldn't explain. The front desk bell rang, its sharp chime cutting through the silence. Rivers looked up, catching Officer Martinez's puzzled expression as a man walked through the entrance. The stranger's appearance immediately set off warning bells in Rivers' mind. His clothes, an expensive suit that had seen better days, hung loosely on his frame, as if he'd lost weight recently. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, carrying the 1,000-yard stare Rivers had seen too often in trauma victims. "Can I help you?" Martinez asked, his hand instinctively moving closer to his weapon. The man's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible across the empty lobby. "I need help." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I was buried 3 days ago." Rivers stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. Something about the man's tone, not desperate or angry, but resigned, caught his attention. He walked over, nodding to Martinez to stand down. "I'm Detective Rivers. Why don't you come to my desk?" He studied the man's gait as he walked, steady but hesitant, like someone recovering from a long illness. "What's your name?" "Peter Gray." The name hit Rivers like a physical blow. 3 days ago, he'd skimmed the obituaries over morning coffee, a habit he'd picked up early in his career. Peter Gray, 42, had died in a car accident on the interstate. The photo in the paper had shown a successful businessman with a warm smile and kind eyes. The same man now stood before him, though the warmth had been replaced by something else, something that made Rivers' skin crawl. Rivers gestured to the chair across from his desk, trying to maintain his professional composure. "Can you prove who you are?" A quiet laugh escaped Peter's lips as he rolled up his sleeve. There, on his forearm, was a distinctive birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. "My wife Sarah has photos," he said. "She can confirm it's me. Though." He paused, his voice catching. "She hasn't been able to see me since I came back." Rivers pulled up the department's database, his fingers moving automatically across the keyboard. The death certificate appeared on his screen: Peter Gray, pronounced dead at St. Mary's Hospital, cause of death, severe trauma from vehicular collision. The medical examiner's signature was clear at the bottom. "Mr. Gray," Rivers began, choosing his words carefully. "You understand this is unusual." "I know I'm dead, Detective." Peter's voice remained eerily calm. "I remember the accident. The truck coming into my lane, the impact. Then darkness. When I woke up, I was standing on Madison Avenue, watching people walk past me like I wasn't there. No one could see me. No one except you." Rivers felt a chill run down his spine. In 15 years of police work, he'd learned to trust his instincts. Right now, they were screaming at him to walk away. But something in Peter's eyes, the raw desperation beneath the calm exterior, held him in place. "Why come to the police?" "Because something's wrong." Peter leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I saw my funeral, Detective. I saw them lower my body into the ground. But I'm still here. And I need to know why." Rivers glanced at the precinct's security cameras, their red lights blinking steadily in the corners of the room. Later, he would check the footage, though a growing part of him already knew what he would, or wouldn't, see. "Tell me about the accident," Rivers said, pulling out his notebook. "Everything you remember." Peter's fingers drummed against the desk, a nervous rhythm that seemed to echo in the empty precinct. "I was driving home late from the office. Merger negotiations that couldn't wait. The rain had just started, one of those sudden summer storms that turn the streets into mirrors. He closed his eyes, his face tightening. I remember checking my phone. Sarah had texted, asking if I wanted leftover lasagna heated up. Then the headlights, they were in the wrong lane, coming straight at me. Rivers wrote quickly, his pen scratching against paper. The truck driver? Never found him. Hit and run. Peter's voice turned bitter. At least, that's what Sarah told me when I watched her talking to the insurance investigator. I stood right there in our living room, screaming at her that I was okay, but she couldn't. His voice cracked. She couldn't hear me. Rivers felt his detective's mind kick into gear, pushing aside the impossibility of the situation to focus on facts. The accident report mentioned a blue semi-truck, but no witnesses got the plate number. Traffic cameras were down for maintenance. He paused, studying Peter's reaction. Convenient timing. Too convenient, Peter agreed. Detective, I've spent the last 3 days trying to understand what happened to me. I've watched my wife cry herself to sleep. I've seen my business partners dividing up my clients. I've stood in front of my own grave. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. But something else happened yesterday. I saw someone using my credit card. Rivers raised an eyebrow. Your accounts should have been frozen. They were. But this person, whoever they are, had a physical copy of my card. They used it at a gas station in Queens. Peter's eyes grew intense. I followed them, detective. They were driving my car, the one that supposedly got totaled in the accident. The implications hit Rivers like a sledgehammer. He pulled up another database, fingers flying across the keyboard. The accident report shows your vehicle was completely destroyed. Impounded at City Lot 23. He found the relevant file and frowned. But there's no photo documentation. Another procedural oversight. Someone's covering their tracks, Peter said. And I think they knew exactly what they were doing. The truck, the cameras, the missing paperwork, it's too perfect. Rivers sat back, his mind racing. Years of experience told him there were only two possibilities: either he was talking to a ghost, something his rational mind refused to accept, or he was uncovering something far more sinister. An elaborately staged accident. A body that might not be what it seemed. And a man who was either a victim of an impossible circumstance or the most convincing con artist he'd ever met. I need to check something, Rivers said, standing up. Wait here. He walked to the evidence room, nodding to the night clerk as he signed in. The case files from the past week were still being processed, stored in temporary boxes before being digitized. He found what he was looking for in box 47, the personal effects recovered from Peter Gray's body. The inventory list was short: one wedding ring, one wallet with ID and credit cards, one smartphone with a cracked screen. Rivers examined each item carefully. The ring showed signs of recent cleaning, too clean for something supposedly pulled from an accident scene. The wallet's leather was scuffed, but the cards inside were pristine. And the phone. Rivers pressed the power button. The screen remained dark. He connected it to a charging cable, waiting for the Apple logo to appear. Instead, nothing happened. He popped open the case and his suspicions deepened. The battery was missing. When he returned to his desk, Peter was standing at the window, staring out at the city lights. Your personal effects, Rivers said, setting the items on his desk. Mind explaining why your phone's battery is missing? Peter turned, confusion crossing his features. What? That's impossible. I had a full charge when. His voice trailed off as his eyes fixed on something behind Rivers. The detective turned to follow his gaze and felt his blood run cold. Through the precinct's glass doors, he could see a figure standing in the rain, someone wearing Peter's face, but with very different eyes. Eyes that were very much alive, and very much afraid. The figure locked eyes with Rivers for a moment, then turned and ran. Rivers' instincts kicked in. "Stay here," he shouted to Peter, or whatever he was, and burst through the precinct doors into the rain. The street glistened under the sodium lights, nearly empty at this hour. He caught a glimpse of movement to his left and sprinted after it, his shoes splashing through puddles. The chase led him down 43rd Street, past closed storefronts and parked cars. The figure ahead moved with desperate speed, but Rivers had spent years running down suspects through these streets. He was gaining ground. As they approached an intersection, a taxi's headlights illuminated the runner's face. Rivers nearly stumbled. It was exactly like looking at Peter Gray, down to the smallest detail. The doppelganger darted into an alley. Rivers followed, drawing his weapon. "NYPD. Stop right there." The alley ended in a chain-link fence. The runner skidded to a halt, turning slowly to face Rivers. Rain streamed down both their faces as they stood there, caught in a moment of impossible confrontation. "Detective Rivers," the man said, his voice identical to Peter's. "You're making a terrible mistake. Hands where I can see them." Rivers kept his gun steady, even as his mind raced to make sense of what he was seeing. "Who are you?" "You know who I am." The man's expression was a mirror of the one Rivers had just left in the precinct, tired, haunted, but with an underlying desperation that seemed more human. "I'm Peter Gray." "Try again." "Peter Gray is sitting at my desk." The man laughed, a broken sound that barely carried over the rain. "Is he? Are you sure about that, detective? Because I can prove who I am. Ask me anything, about Sarah, about our honeymoon in Venice, about the scar on her left shoulder from when she fell off her bike at 12. I know everything because I am Peter Gray." Rivers felt the first tremor of doubt. The accident was staged, yes. But not the way you think. The man reached slowly into his jacket. Rivers tensed, but what emerged was a folded piece of paper, already getting wet in the rain. 3 months ago, I discovered something at my company. Something people would kill to keep quiet. I tried to do the right thing, go to the authorities. They tried to stop me." "Who?" "The same people who hired someone to steal my identity. To replace me." He held out the paper. "Everything's in here. Names, dates, account numbers. The kind of evidence that gets people like me killed, or worse, erased." Rivers kept his gun trained with one hand, taking the paper with the other. As he started to unfold it, a new sound cut through the rain, footsteps, approaching fast from behind. "Detective, down." The voice was Peter's, the other Peter's, but Rivers' training took over before he could process the warning. He dropped and rolled as something whistled through the space where his head had been. A figure in black had appeared at the alley's entrance, wielding what looked like a metal pipe. The doppelganger used the distraction to vault over a dumpster and scramble up the fence. By the time Rivers regained his footing, both the attacker and the runner had vanished, leaving him alone in the rain-soaked alley. The paper in his hand had dissolved into an illegible mess. When Rivers returned to the precinct, Peter was gone. Martinez looked up from the desk, confused. "Everything okay, detective? You ran out of here like you saw a ghost." "The man I was interviewing." "What man?" Rivers stared at the empty chair where Peter had sat. The personal effects he'd retrieved from evidence were still on his desk, but something was different. He picked up the wallet, examining its contents. The credit cards were gone. His computer screen still showed the death certificate for Peter Gray. Rivers scrolled through the document, looking for something he'd missed. The medical examiner's signature caught his eye, Dr. James Chen. Rivers knew every me in the city. There was no Dr. Chen. Rivers drove through the pre-dawn streets, his windshield wipers keeping time with his racing thoughts. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, turning the city into a blur of neon reflections and shadow. He'd called in a few favors, gotten an address in Forest Hills, Queens. The home of Sarah Gray. He shouldn't be doing this. Not at 4 in the morning, not without backup, not based on the word of a man who claimed to be dead. But the inconsistencies gnawed at him, the missing evidence photos, the fake medical examiner, the two identical men. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make Peter Gray disappear. The question was, which Peter Gray was real? The house was a modest 2-story colonial, its windows dark except for a faint light in what might be the kitchen. Rivers parked across the street, watching. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed something odd, a car in the driveway, partially covered by a tarp. He pulled up the accident report on his phone, comparing the vehicle description. Same make, same model, same color. The car that was supposed to be destroyed. Rivers got out, approaching carefully. The tarp was wet but loose, easy to pull back. The driver's side door showed signs of damage, but nothing like what you'd expect from a fatal collision. He shone his flashlight through the window. The interior was clean, almost too clean. No blood, no shattered glass. Just an empty coffee cup in the holder and a hand touched his shoulder. Rivers spun around, reaching for his weapon, but stopped short. Sarah Gray stood there in a bathrobe, her face pale in the streetlight. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You're the detective," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you?" "He said you'd come." She hugged herself against the cold. The real one. Rivers felt the pieces starting to shift. "Mrs. Gray, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on." She glanced around nervously. "Not here. There's a diner 2 blocks over. Give me 5 minutes to change." The Bell Tower Diner was nearly empty, just a few truck drivers and early shift workers scattered among the booths. Rivers and Sarah sat in the corner, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. She'd traded her bathrobe for jeans and a sweater, but her hands shook slightly as she spoke. "Peter came to me 3 days ago, the real Peter. He explained everything. About the company, about what he'd found. About them." She took a shaky breath. "I didn't believe him at first. How could I? I just buried him. But he knew things, detective. Things only my husband could know." "What did he find?" "Evidence of money laundering. Hundreds of millions, filtered through shell companies. But it was bigger than that. The companies were fronts for something else. Weapons, maybe, or worse. Peter found a pattern: people who discovered the truth would disappear, only to return changed. Their families never noticed. Or if they did." She left the sentence hanging. Rivers thought about the man in the alley, about the desperation in his voice. The other Peter, the one who died, isn't dead at all. He's one of them. A replacement, sent to take over Peter's life, to make sure the truth stayed buried. Sarah's voice hardened. "They're good at what they do. Perfect duplicates, down to the smallest detail. But they make mistakes. Little things. The way they hold their fork. The songs they don't remember. The birthmarks they have to fake." Rivers remembered the crescent moon on Peter's arm. The one who came to the station. Also one of them. "They must have realized Peter contacted you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a USB drive. "This is what they're afraid of. Everything Peter uncovered. Names, dates, security footage. Proof that people are being replaced." Rivers took the drive, his mind already constructing the implications. If what she was saying was true, it went beyond money laundering or corporate espionage. This was something else entirely. Something that challenged his understanding of what was possible. "Why trust me?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Because Peter said you'd ask that question. He said you were the only cop he knew who'd follow the truth, no matter how impossible it seemed. The diner's door chimed. Rivers glanced up and felt his blood freeze. 3 men had entered, wearing dark suits despite the early hour. As they turned toward the corner booth, he caught a glimpse of their faces. They all wore Peter Gray's face. "Back door," Rivers whispered, reaching for his weapon. "Now." Sarah was already moving, sliding out of the booth as Rivers stood to block their view. The men advanced with unhurried confidence, their movements synchronized in a way that made his skin crawl. He caught the waitress's eye, flashing his badge. "NYPD. Everyone out." The civilians didn't need to be told twice. As they rushed for the exits, Rivers backed toward the kitchen, keeping his gun trained on the approaching figures. They moved as one unit, spreading out to cut off his escape routes. "Detective Rivers," they spoke in unison, their voices a perfect match for Peter's. "This doesn't concern you." "Pretty sure impersonating a dead man concerns me." Rivers felt the kitchen door behind him. "Want to tell me how you do it?" "Surgery. Masks." The nearest Peter smiled, the expression empty of warmth. "You've seen too many movies, detective. The truth is far simpler. We are Peter Gray. All of us. We are what humanity will become, perfect copies, unburdened by the chaos of individuality." "That's not how I describe it." The voice came from behind the counter. The real Peter, or who Rivers believed was the real Peter, emerged with a fire extinguisher in his hands. "Detective, duck." Rivers dropped as Peter unleashed a cloud of white powder. The duplicate stumbled back, momentarily blinded. Rivers used the confusion to sprint through the kitchen, grabbing Sarah's arm as he passed. They burst out the back door into the alley, where a car was waiting, its engine running. "Get in!" Peter shouted from the driver's seat. Rivers hesitated for a split second, his detective's mind racing through the possibilities. Then he heard footsteps approaching from both directions of the alley. No time for doubt. He dove into the back seat as Sarah took the passenger side. The car peeled out of the alley as the duplicates emerged from the diner. In the rearview mirror, Rivers watched them climb into a black SUV with government plates. "Want to tell me what we're dealing with here? Would you believe me if I told you they're not human?" Peter took a hard right, tires squealing. "They're some kind of biological constructs. Perfect duplicates grown in labs, programmed to replace people who know too much." "About what?" "About who really runs things." Peter's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "The companies I investigated. They're fronts for something bigger. A program to gradually replace key figures in business, politics, law enforcement. They're building a network, detective. And no one notices because the replacements are perfect." The SUV appeared behind them, gaining ground. Rivers checked his ammunition. "Not perfect." "You spotted the difference." "Because I created the program." Peter's words landed like bombs in the car's interior. 15 years ago, I was part of a classified research team. We thought we were developing medical technology, a way to grow replacement organs. But they took it further. Much further. Sarah reached for his hand. "That's why they wanted you. They needed my research. The ethical safeguards I built into the process." Peter swerved to avoid a delivery truck. "I destroyed my notes, corrupted the data. But they found another way. They're not just copying bodies anymore, they're duplicating memories, personalities. The only flaw is that the copies can't access the most recent memories of their originals. That's why they needed me alive." Rivers processed this as the city blurred past. The Peter Gray who died in the crash. A message. A demonstration of what they could do. Peter checked the mirror. The one who came to the station was another warning. They wanted me to know they could replace me at any time. The SUV rammed them from behind. Sarah screamed as Peter fought for control. Rivers saw more vehicles converging from side streets, identical black SUVs with identical drivers. The evidence on that drive, Rivers said. Is it enough to stop them? If we can get it to the right people. Peter pulled onto the bridge, heading for Manhattan. There's a journalist, Rachel Chen. She's been investigating similar cases. Get that drive to her, Anne. The world exploded in a shower of glass and screeching metal. One of the SUVs had caught up, forcing them into the guardrail. The car spun, tires losing traction on the wet road. Rivers caught a glimpse of the river below, dark water reflecting the city lights. Then they were airborne. In the moment before impact, Rivers saw Peter pull Sarah close, saw the fear and determination in his eyes, human eyes, full of emotion that no copy could duplicate. As the car hit the water, one thought crystallized in Rivers' mind: in a world of perfect duplicates, the only way to tell the real from the fake was to look for the flaws. The imperfections that made us human. The river rushed in, cold and dark. Rivers kicked out the window, lungs burning. Through the murky water, he saw Peter and Sarah swimming for the surface. He followed, the USB drive secure in his pocket. They broke the surface into chaos. Emergency lights strobed across the bridge above. The SUVs were gone, their drivers vanished like ghosts into the night. As Rivers treaded water, he looked at Peter, the real Peter, marked by fear and fatigue and the desperate love for his wife. What now? Sarah asked, her voice shaking from the cold. Rivers thought about the drive in his pocket, about the impossible story it would tell. About a world where anyone could be replaced, where identity itself had become fluid. About the thin line between the real and the artificial. Now, he said, watching dawn break over the city, we find out who's still human. Peter nodded, understanding in his eyes. In a world of perfect copies, the truth was the only thing that couldn't be duplicated. And somewhere in the city, in the growing light of morning, Rachel Chen was waiting for a story that would change everything. If they could reach her in time. If she was still herself.